If you want to get into the nitty gritty, so I happen to use iPhone. I use an app called A Tracker Pro. There's a bunch of apps out there, largely for freelancers and the like, who who want to track how they bill their time to different clients. But the key things I would look for in an app that would be useful for you is a widget of some capacity that makes it that allows really fast switching time. So it only takes me about a second to switch what it is that I'm paying my attention to. The other thing that I would look for is something that can synchronize with your calendar, right? So that you can look back on that information later and see how what had your attention compared to what you planned to spend your time on, right? So you can actually get some feedback there. But the interesting thing about tracking your attention or even your time is that the very act of tracking it from like a Heisenberg uncertainty principle type capacity, the very act of tracking it changes it. It makes all of your decisions a little bit more conscious. So if you ever decide to explore, just track what you're spending your time on. I bet you will spend it better or in a way that you are happier. And obviously from there you can go deeper. But just paying attention to it makes a world of difference. Does anybody else have questions at the moment? Yep. Right. So my attention, or sorry, my time was more so my behaviors, my actions. Attention, the way I look at it, is more so my thoughts. So in some cases, those are one and the same, right? But in many cases, they're not. Like if I'm doing the dishes, that's a it's an activity that doesn't take like a ton of brain power. I'm usually thinking about something else. So in a case like that, I would say that my behavior was this, but my attention was actually on maybe a conversation I had with my wife, or maybe it's chatting with the kids while I'm doing the dishes. Does that make sense? So I think that what we think about, as it were, and our attention is a better indicator of how happy we ultimately are. Like doing the dishes and some of these other not so complex activities, there it's not in those that we find fulfillment. It's in what we're spending our cycles on. Yep. Sure. So directly influence someone's emotions. Do you do any form of art or music or dance or singing or sketching? Yeah. Art is the prime example of how you evoke emotions directly in people, right? Because they see that more than anything, it's an emotionally evocative response, right? Um, And in terms of giving someone time, well, let's say you have access to certain technologies, right? They give them time. Or let's say you're extremely good at accounting. Someone really needs an accountant, right? They are, maybe they're a recruiter of some variety, and you help them manage some of the details of their business. They don't happen to be detail oriented. You're able to take that off of their plates, right? Save them a ton of time, because maybe it would have taken them 10 hours to do what you can do in two. They save 10, right? They pay you for your two. They still have a net benefit to encourage them to do it, right? So anything that saves time, usually in an objective way, is a good example of that. So either through your skill set or access to technology. Yep. Right. So it's interesting. So first of all, the outcome, like, I mean, it's helpful to apply probability if you want, right? If you think that something is a highly likely outcome or a less likely outcome. But in terms of the outcomes of the decision, it's helpful to separate the outcomes from how it is you made the decision, right? The outcomes will occur one way or the other, but even if they don't turn out in your favor, it doesn't mean you made the decision poorly, right? Making the decision in line with what you value is likelier. Sorry, it will likely result in your achievement of that goal, but it doesn't guarantee it. All you're doing is you're improving your odds, right? If you don't do it in line with what you value, or if you don't find fulfillment, if you don't actually enjoy the process of working towards your goal, you're far less likely to achieve it. right, than if you did. So I'd argue this, right? Figure out what just naturally internally sets you on fire, energizes you, right? Set your goals from there. What goals are you going to feel every day like you want to work towards, right? And those goals will pull you towards them, as opposed to you ever having to force yourself to do it, right? And that's like coming from an efficiency standpoint. Like you can do all the time hacks that you want, but it's really difficult from a sustained period of time standpoint to force yourself to do something you don't want to do, right? The best application of some of those techniques, right, and task management and all that kind of stuff is when your direction is already what you want, right, and then you're doing it more efficiently. Does that answer your question? Okay, cool. So recognize that you guys have other priorities and possibly other classes and the like. You're more than welcome to head out, but at the same time, I'll be around here for as long as you'd like to answer any questions, whether again that's specific to you or to connect, whether that be on LinkedIn or otherwise. Thank you.
So I'm Dan.
Okay.
I have a question. So I feel like for what you're kind of prescribing, I feel like in order for, at least for me, like when I kind of started understanding things like this about being more internally reflective, it was from a time that's more when you're in kind of a state of turmoil. Like, how do you think, like, are you directing it? Are you directing your, I guess, approach to people? Because I feel like people are more likely to resonate with this if they're currently
If they're currently
in a state of
yeah, or if they're unhappy with how the future looks or how they currently feel, and that's true. Like if somebody is good, if they're happy, if they're comfortable with what the future looks like, barring the uncertainty that we all have in it, then great, great. Like that's wonderful. I couldn't want anything more for anyone, right? And so, I hope that that's the case. Frankly, I hope that people, after looking internally, realize that they are behaving in a way that they really enjoy, and they're just that much more certain about it now, right? So not everyone's going to be in a situation where they need to make a change, but I think as you reflect internally, whether you make a change or not, either way, you're going to be more certain of the decision.
yeah. And one thing that I personally struggle with is like I come to these understandings about like some of the things that you've come to.
Yeah,
But it turns out that like when I'm forced back into a scenario, like I'll come to an understanding after going through a scenario.
sure.
And then after going through a similar scenario the next time,
Yeah,
it's almost like I'm learning from it, but I forget certain aspects. And like do you find yourself going through that?
yeah. So I mean, as bright as you are, as all of your classmates are, we are still so limited in how quickly we can bring back certain memories or relevant lessons, right? So that's part of it. But I guess the clearer you are on what you care about, and the more you focus on it, right, the more likely you are to remember it in the moment when you might be useful, right? So I think, like most things, it kind of comes out of repetition. And in terms of habits, so we have lots of bad habits and the like, but the best way to replace a bad habit is not actually to just try to not do it. It's actually replace it with something better, right? So the more you know what you care about, the more that you actively pursue it, the more it'll be fresh in your memory, the less likely you are to forget it, the more likely you are to apply it. It ends up being a virtuous cycle as opposed to a vicious one. It sort of builds on itself. So, yes, please. Hi there.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I'm James.
Hi, James. Alan.
I have a question about how like you plan every single hour of the day. Like, how do you fit in like downtime into the schedule, and how do you align it with like the
Yeah.
progress?
So that's a really good question. So first of all, the goal is not 100% productivity ever. It's not sustainable, right? We all need to, like, I want to be clear here. We all need downtime. We all need to recharge. What recharges you, again, is part of what it is that you value. You get to decide whether it is. Nobody else gets any say, right? The goal is to be intentional, right? So I care about downtime. I care about spending time with my friends. I care about spending time on my studies, so on and so forth. So I'm going to spend some time with my friends. I'm going to spend some time on my studies. I'm going to spend some time alone. And I just don't, I'm trying not to spend too much on any one thing at the expense of the other things I care about, right? So the goal is intentional, not productive. And if you, in a funny, ironic way, I suppose, the more intentional you are with what it is that you spend time on, the more productive you are relative to your values. You're just not productive in some objective sense of getting the best grades or earning the most money or like things that aren't centered on what you care about. Does that make sense? So yeah, the goal is intentional, not always productive because it's just not sustainable. And I'm trying not to pretend like it is. Yeah.
So when you say that in terms of your scheduling over your week, would it be more like you're just trying to get as close as those 100 hours that you like waited as possible, as opposed to like saying that I'm gonna do this in this time, as opposed to like if you want and value something, then you
Right.
would just do that instead.
Right. So on a week to week basis, I mean, yes, our priorities won't change, but maybe something requires 20 hours of us. Maybe it's a particular assignment. Like I remember assignments that take that long. Like it's awful, but you'll get through it. I guess what I'm saying is, on the long run, as far as a rolling average is concerned, you just want to make sure that you are relatively close to the balances there. You're not going to strike that perfect balance probably ever on any given week. Never mind continuing. But the more mindful you are of it, the closer you'll stay, right? And you'll offset some of the difficult weeks with some of the easier weeks, so on and so forth. So it does involve time blocking, which is this concept that's not new but a useful one. But when you do that as a behavior, you're faced regularly with this reality that you only have so much time, right? And some people will look at that and it'll be extremely daunting. Oh, well, I want to do everything. And that's true, but at least from a philosophical standpoint, like I always found comfort in the idea that it's the fact that we don't have all the time in the world that forces us to choose what we care about. And when we're aware of that, we actually enjoy life more than if we had all the time in the world doing a ton of things that we actually don't care about just because we can. Does that make sense? So that limitation, you can choose how you look at it. But I find it can be an empowering one if you realize that makes that helps you choose what you love, and that helps you enjoy the time you do have more. Does that make sense?
What suggestions would you have for just like avoiding distractions while you're trying to manage your time? Like,
Yeah, for sure. We all face them, myself as well. Like I don't want to pretend like I don't. I do, right? And a lot of this was frankly born out of my own distraction of things. So a couple of things. Distractions tend to form as habits, right? There'll be a trigger, there'll be an active or an action, and a reward. If you've ever seen sort of the reward triangle, that's it. Um, so as you notice a distraction, try to become more and more mindful of what you did right prior to engaging in the behavior, right, that gave you the psychological reward or the dopamine hit or whatever it is chemically. Um, one of the best ways to avoid distractions is to find out what those triggers are and remove those triggers from your environment, right? So, if you can do something on paper as opposed to having your phone necessarily near you, and it's a problem for some people and not others, then try that, right? So look for those triggers. Right? That's one of the better ways. And the other way too is, as I was mentioning, the best way to deal with a bad habit is to not try to do less of it, but to replace it with something better, right? So instead of engaging in this habit, right, or this distraction, what do I want to do more? And then the more you reinforce that, the more you actually do it, the more that pathway in your brain becomes more reinforced and eventually becomes stronger than the habit formed pathway. Yep.
I have a question. So I guess this is a bit relevant to myself, but
Yep.
I'm a pretty spontaneous person, and I guess
Great.
my values are shifting sometimes with mood and stuff. So
Yep.
how do I really know how much I value each value that I have, like in a long-term scale rather than like a short-term scale? Because like sometimes like at this moment in time, I might value this more than this,
Hmm.
and then at that moment in time, I might value that more than that, and then but
Yep.
when I look back, it's not necessarily aligned with what I want long term.
Yes. So a couple ways you could tackle that because I'm absolutely familiar with that too. And the idea is, well, so one thing you can first of all try is maybe once a week or however, whatever time scale you think is appropriate, try to write it down again. After a month or 2 months, look back on the 8 sets of values that you said you had for yourself at the time. Look for common threads, things that seem to be consistent, right? Look for what is ephemeral. Look for what changes on a week to week basis. And there's nothing wrong with, and it's very common actually to crave adventure, right? Which is inherently uncertainty, right? That's great too. So what you might do is when you look at the like several versions of that over time, is you might take the basic ones and maybe those fit in just because they're always there, and then you realize that the rest of it might be a need for adventure. The rest of it might be a need for spontaneity, a need for for learning or growing in some novel way, right? And you can fit into that category. And when you then try to spend your time in that way, it's like, well, I'm going to give myself 2 hours a day. I'm only going to do it for 2 hours, but I'm not going to tell myself what I'm going to do in that 2 hours, right? At those 2 hours, I give myself the freedom to do absolutely whatever I want, whatever I feel like at the time, right? Which will crave your need for spontaneity while at the same time giving you, I think, the baseline energy around the things that will give you, happiness long term. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Cool.
I kind of just wanted to ask, supposing like the definition of like downtime versus like a stimulus,
Hmm.
I find like over the course of the week, myself personally, I only have so much energy and yeah, as you said, like so much time to like get work done and do what I enjoy.
Yep.
Um, and because I'm spending so much of my waking hours doing such like mentally stimulating tasks,
Yep.
I want to shift my downtime towards something that doesn't require a lot of brain power.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So I'm wondering, like, at the same time, like what you said about kind of putting parts, like values aside, and then how you kind of feel like you're missing a part of you. Yeah, I've been really feeling that. I used to play a lot of music
Sure.
in high school. So
But it's a very cerebral activity.
I suppose, yeah, it's super stimulating, and I find like it kind of kicks me and gets me going. But when I spend so much of my waking hours already being super stimulated
Yeah.
and doing a lot of work, and then in my downtime, I tend to want to take it off. Music doesn't quite fit in there, I suppose. Where like
Sure.
it's also so stimulating that I find I'm more exhausted afterwards than I was before.
Yeah.
I
That makes
suppose
sense.
differently, but so like how would you think
How'd you
of
manage that?
balancing that?
So music. I mean, that maybe you get an opportunity to play music when there are natural breaks in your workload, right? As your stimulating activity, right? But it doesn't make sense to do all these stimulating activities because we tend not to have the energy for it. Our energy changes throughout the day. Different people will advocate from a productivity standpoint to manage your energy as opposed to your time or your priorities. Different perspectives. They all work to find out what works best for you. But when it comes to like the music and like really like what's the end goal? The end goal is that you are better off, or that you're more likely to achieve the end goals that you actually really want. And so let's say that's related to graduating. Let's say that's related to your career, right? Well, what is going to make your schoolwork more sustainable and more sustainably accomplished, right? It isn't going to be burning yourself out and playing music because in your mind you love music and you're forcing yourself to do it in that time even when you don't feel like it. Like what is going to sustainably help you achieve that goal? And it might be the non-cerebral activities balanced off of the schoolwork, and that's okay, right? It's not like in a way those help you achieve your end goal, right? So they're valuable, maybe not in isolation, but because that then gives you the energy to do more of the high value stuff tomorrow, right? So you can justify it in that way to yourself if you find that that's what you need to keep up the energy and keep up the momentum on a day in day out basis, because it is very easy to burn ourselves out. Um, so so uh, that's the way I would justify some of the other behaviors. Yeah. Um, any other questions or thoughts or feedback?
Yeah, I want to ask, so like when there's a like possible negative outcome in doing something you value, such as like when you're doing an assignment and it's just not working, or it's like
Mm-hmm.
argument in a relationship, like how do you like make that since it's still doing something you value, but it kind of feels like a waste of time. Do you get what I'm trying to say?
So what I understand you saying, so I understand you saying that it's hard, and in the moment it's not rewarding,
Yes.
right? Working through relationship issues tends to get better in the long run. Working on your homework tends to be a good idea in the long run, but it doesn't feel like it in the moment, and I get that. And so, to a degree, there is this this love that I think you'll need to find for the work, right? And sometimes when we have these necessary things that need to be done on our way towards what we care about, our goals, right? We can enjoy them more by realizing that they are necessary. We can enjoy them as much as the achievement of the goal itself, because without them, the goal is not going to happen, right? So I'd encourage you to think about how you think about it, if that makes sense. Um, try to try to take, I guess, some pleasure in the fact that when something is hard, you are growing at a tremendous rate at that time, right? And that development is key to your accomplishing whatever you is you want to accomplish. Um, so it takes practice though. But if let's put it this way, if you care about something enough, you'll put in the work. If you're putting in the work and it's awful, maybe you don't care about it enough, and that's okay because that's feedback too, right?
How often do you experience the urge to feel fulfilled by success rather than the process?
Um, Me personally,
Yes.
yeah, I I mean, it varies day to day, but I'd say probably less than half the time. It takes time to get to that point where you value the process more than the outcome. Um, but another way you can look at the process is mini outcomes. If you're really outcome focused, you can start by, well, what do I want to accomplish in this hour? What do I want to accomplish today, right? And you'll find that achieving many little outcomes, the more you do it, when you differentiate over whatever or integrate, it starts to approximate. It starts to look like the process itself. So that said, I probably want to get my stuff out of the way for the next class. We can certainly chat outside if you guys would be open to that. I know your time is limited. I'm here for as long as you would like, but let me just make sure that I'm not in the way of the next class.